Let's sign in. And let's not sign out. But let's refresh the page. So since the state goes back to null, it doesn't know I'm signed in, but I never actually signed out, and I suspect Firebase still has me signed in. So what can we do about that? If you look at the documentation, actually this bullet point that's right here. In your apps, the recommended way to know the auth status of your user is to set an observer on the auth object. You can then get the user's basic profile information from the user object. See manage users. Okay. Get the currently signed in user. The recommended way is to set an observer on the auth object. Firebase auth, that's the thing that we import as auth, onAuthStateChanged. So this gets called whenever the authentication state changes. And we pass it a function that receives a user as an argument. If the user is there, then we know they're signed in. Otherwise, we know they're not signed in. And by using an observer instead of doing what we're doing, we ensure that the auth object isn't in an intermediate state, such as initialization, when you get the current user. Okay, sure. Also, there's firebase.auth.currentUser. So we should listen for changes to the auth state. When should we do that? We should do that as early as possible, probably before the DOM renders. Remember our lifecycle methods, like component did mount? We learned that there are several of these, and that for each one, wherever that is, there we go. For each of these things, there's a will and a did. Will right before it happens, did after it happens. And mount is when it's created and inserted into the DOM. So we start syncing right after it's inserted into the DOM. I want to start listening for the authentication state to change, though, immediately. So before render is even called. So component will mount should do just that. Run first thing. What I'm trying to call is auth on state changed. So auth I imported dot on auth state changed. And it receives a function as its argument. And that function we see receives a user object. And according to the example, if the user is there, then we're signed in, else we're not. So if user signed in, else signed out. So in some respects, this actually simplifies things for us. What happens right now if we sign in? We call auth.signin with pop-up, and then we call handle auth. But it seems like maybe we don't need to do that. Auth.signin with pop-up will make us signed in, which means our auth state will change. So we could just call handle auth from over there in app. So maybe we don't need this anymore. Maybe all we need to do here is call auth sign in with pop-up. So we don't need this handle auth prop. So when we render the sign-in component down in render, we won't pass handle auth. Instead, we will rely on the fact that sign-in with pop-up should change the authentication state. And since we're listening for that, we can say if user, that means we've signed in, we can just call this dot handle auth at that time. Save ourselves passing down a prop. Now, handle auth needs some stuff though, right? Right now, handle auth is written so that it receives this result object that has a user with a user ID. But in our onAuthStateChanged method, we have the actual user. So we could just pass the user directly to handle auth instead of this result object. So this would become just user.uid instead of result.user.uid. So if we do that, up in our observer, onAuthStateChanged, we'll call this.handleAuth, and we'll just pass along this user object. Otherwise, we're signed out. And what do we do when we sign out? Right now, the actual act of signing out is auth.signout. But maybe we don't need the promise. Maybe we don't need to call this.setState down here. We just need to sign out. And signing out is a change to the auth state. So that is going to run this function. And we know that it'll run the else because the user isn't there anymore. We're signed out. And so if we are signed out, then we set state, turning the UID back to null. So now we're just handling this stuff right here with onAuthStateChanged, which it says will save us some potential bugs. Here I am. I sign out. I sign in. Now I'm signed in. I haven't signed out, and I'm going to refresh the page. And I stay signed in. So we got that by using onAuthStateChanged, because that's going to run right off the bat. It's going to see that we are in fact signed in with Firebase. So even when we refresh the page, it'll set it correctly, which it didn't do if we were only ever checking when they actually clicked a button. Now it'll check when the page first loads. Cool? Cool. Don't you cuss at me. I don't know who it was. Where did you get that? Set up an authentication state observer. Authentication state observer. Yeah, Alex. Indeed.